because, you know, they have limited time. Which ones are they gonna read?
The last
Read the ones.
Where they're gonna learn
Actually
something
gonna
or
learn something.
have an opinion
And
about
then-
it.
Yeah.
And,
But didn't enter the gate.
Yes.
Wasn't surprised.
And, you know, knock on wood, I guess, I've been okay, you know, I haven't had to test it. But you worry about it.
Well, I wear masks whenever I'm in a large group
Right.
and play or on the metro.
Yeah.
Oh, it's from, you know what, oh, I don't know this one. This one is from.
Oh, very well.
From in New York.
You mean you're not from Madeline Represent?
You know, I met her when she did her last book, she was here in Minneapolis. And I wore one, my picture, she said, oh, I like your pin, I thought, oh my gosh. I cried, yeah, Madeline, she was at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
I did not go.
I did, and, yeah, her book, interesting.
The risk of stating the obvious, coffee and stuff over
But we were
there.
just talking about the.
That's more than we're gonna eat, so.
Yeah, I'm very conflicted about that, whether to take that last.
I got it Friday.
You did?
Yes.
I'm getting it at 3.
Okay, I was listening to what Jim said, it's, I don't know.
I'm getting it because John and my husband and I are about to go on a trip.
Okay.
So, mask or no mask, we're getting on a big silver bird.
Oh, you
for
watched,
6 hours. I'm getting the booster.
Am I gonna be in large?
I was.
Well, I'm going to be in Europe.
It's handy to have those things. Actually, at this point, there's a lot of that.
Rabbi, if I get up and leave at 11:15, please understand.
Insult.
Maybe with the Jews.
Mike, Rabbi might do it himself.
Yeah, you know, you just don't know.
Good to see you, Mark. Okay, so everyone have text on there or no? You guys need some text?
Okay.
During our trip.
For sure.
Here, Richard, there we go, that makes it a little easier.
England, and then most of the time you're gonna be in.
This way.
Where? Holland, Belgium.
Oh, wonderful.
So not good.
Mhm.
So the
What's
source
not
of
to
that
love? If
is
the
the
travel
first
is good,
paragraph
the weather is good, the people are nice.
Yeah.
Anything
Just
is
there
first
you
paragraph.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Ireland.
So, anyway.
Whereabouts in Ireland?
Good, thank you.
Whereabouts in Ireland?
Well, Dublin and then the countryside for all the different, and I live in Scotland. And you know, I've been to Europe so many times, I haven't been able to visit. So that's gonna be my,
Pretty fun.
oh yes, and then Jewry will be gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
want to make a trip like my oldest son did a few years ago when he turned 40. He and his best buddy from junior high on.
Oh, my
They
gosh.
they both turned 40. They went to Scotland and did a distillery crawl.
How entertaining could that be?
Oh,
Or you wouldn't even know whether you were entertained or not.
I went to the Annapolis market yesterday,
Yeah.
and there are all kinds of
Jerry
distilled things.
Yes.
Various single malt whiskeys.
At the where?
Annapolis market here. Annapolis.
Oh, down at the city dock.
Yes.
Oh.
Not at City Dock. It's at Riva. It's near Riva Road. It's near the CVS, near the
It's on Harry S. Truman
and Harriet's.
and Riva.
Oh, it's a liquor store?
No, it's the farmer's market.
Oh! And they sell single malt whiskey there?
Well, you can make lots of things in Maryland.
Wow.
I mean, they let you sample before. They have different things.
But let you sample too. That's my kind of farmer's market. Yeah.
I had the great pleasure in Baton Rouge of having a whiskey bar open down the street.
Oh, my gosh.
And they would do once a month, women would be free for women to do a whiskey tasting, you know, like event and with education and everything. The men had to pay, but for the women, they were trying to get more women to fans.
Was it The Doors? Remember Jim Morrison from
Yes.
The Doors? Show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Don't ask why. What a great group those guys were.
Light my fire.
Oh yeah, Light My Fire was amazing. But like some of the Doors.
You know,
I
that's
love
like
the Doors.
It's like a 9-minute
Poking around.
song.
I know.
Goes on forever.
Hello, Paul. Nice to see you.
It's like a computer train.
How are
Good
you?
morning. Welcome. Sit anywhere you'd like.
DALKEY. Pretty little town.
Oh, okay, and we're going,
Have a seat. You're breathing heavy again. Would you like me to go get you a glass of water?
No, I'm just walking, I walk fast, this is one way I get exercise, I walk like I'm a sugar.
It's a pretty town, got a lot of
Wise
tea rooms
man
on the
you are.
water, the Irish Sea.
All right. Well, is my watch, no one's coming on Zoom today, which is fine with me.
Really?
But I'm not gonna turn it off lest,
They might be late.
they come in late, that's exactly right. So, yeah, here we are. Last week, as you remember, we did the Rise of Spanish Jewry. Hey Merv, nice to see you. Rise of Spanish Jewry, and that went from essentially 711 to around 1250, which is where we are now. And now today we're going to talk about the decline. The decline is how do I put it? The decline of Spanish Jewry is not nearly as fun, not nearly as sweet as the rise. Just as a quick reminder, but not with too much time talking about it. The rise of Spanish Jewry is is marked by incredible growth of Jewish culture, of Jewish scholarship, of Jewish placement in society. There are very few societies that I can think of, maybe short of pre-World War II Germany and current day America, that saw Judaism kind of flourish in the way that it did in Spain. Is the Zoom link live? I've been waiting to be admitted, huh?
May I add something?
Wait 1 second. Yeah, sure, Paul, go ahead.
From my experience with Vienna, in Vienna there were two directions for kids. They can go to the public school or they can go to the gymnasium. The gymnasium requires tuition. So most of the people, Catholics in Vienna, sent their children to the public school, and the Jews who had money sent their children to the gymnasium and paid the tuition. So as a result, they got a pre-college education. And many of them, therefore, many of the Jewish graduates of the gymnasium became lawyers, physicians, dentists, and very successful businessmen because they had a much better education than the rest of the population.
Pardon me, I'm trying this now because...
Oh, just in case?
Yeah, now I just signed on to this one and no one's here. No, let's see. Oh, there's Steve, someone knows entered. Try again. There we go. Oh, look at this. Now people are signing in. All right. Oh, all right. There we go. Wow.
From nobody to somebody.
Well, what happened was that it was incorrectly placed in my whatever. Who cares?
Got it.
Who cares?
But now you fixed it.
Yeah.
they're coming.
Yeah, and now they're coming.
Open it up and they shall come.
I'm close. There we go. Look, everyone's coming in now. All right, so with apologies, I was wondering why no one was in my Zoom class again. took it personally. Oh my God, now they're just, now it's like an embarrassment. Right?
Close it off.
I know. So sorry to all of you who are watching on Zoom. Can you hear me, by the way, on Zoom? Can you hear us? Okay, good. Yeah, clearly there was a mix-up on the Zoom link that I had in my, whatever. I can explain to you what the problem is, but just suffice it to say that,
It's fixed.
yeah, it's fixed now. So I was using clearly there was either we put the correct link, has to be the correct link in my account, and then we sent out the wrong link. Last week's link. Doesn't matter. We're good now. So good to see everybody, and thanks for being here. And by the way, if you're wondering about what's going on with that crazy thing up top, and that is our new camera here, in which it's called the owl, right there in the middle. So if you talk, it'll go right to you. So if you are picking your nose, be sure to do so quietly, right? Because the camera will go straight to you. Hey, I just tell it as I see it. Anyway, again, welcome. So glad that you're here. We were talking. I briefly started, but I'll start back up again by saying that very few cultures saw. I think Paul, as I was futzing with the computer, was mentioning Vienna. Yes. Okay. So pre-World War II, lots of places had in Europe saw Jews kind of flourishing to some degree, but I think that certainly no place in the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th century saw it quite like Spain. I mean, really no place. And I mean, I meant talk. I mean, look, Chastai ben Shabrut was the chief physician, and ended up creating an alliance with Sancho because of in Navarre because of how he helped that prince lose weight and mount a horse. Shmuel Hanagid was the general of the army of Granada. I mean, these are incredible heights that Jews do not reach, typically, especially at that time. But in Spain, they did. And the biggest reason is because Islam, contrary to kind of your modern day understanding of Islam, Islam was such a cultured, sophisticated religion and people. Only Islam would be able to kind of embrace and appreciate and enable another culture to flourish the way. 13th century, things start to change in Spain, and that's where we are. And to start with, you have to understand that what's happening in 12th, 13th century Spain is they're getting caught up in a wider European debate. And what's that wider European debate? It's the Jewish-Christian debate that's happening in wider Europe. It got serious in Paris in 1239 when it was argued that numerous passages of the Talmud blasphemed Jesus. And Jesus is, by the way, found in many, many places in the Talmud. In fact, if you're part of my Sages class that we teach, we've talked about Jesus a lot. Especially because so many of these early, hello, Laura, I'm so happy to see you. If you would maybe sit here, maybe you could. And you have all of these to choose from. You can pick up from your favorite. So Jesus is located, is found in the Talmud in great many times. And the Christians were communicating in the 12th, 13th century in Europe and in Paris specifically, was how Jews had substituted the Talmud for the Bible in terms of its holy documents.
Oy vey.
Oy vey zmir. And what happened? It led to mass burning of the Talmud in Paris, and this would happen in various different places in Europe. Paris most notably. And so soon after, in 1263, in Spain, there's this, what do you know? There's a new king of Aragon. His name is James, and he orders a debate in which the spokespeople for Christianity would prove its superiority over Judaism, and thus convince the Jews of the area, convince the Jews in that area of the value of conversion.
There's another aspect to this.
Audio is not good at echoes.
The second coming of Christ is dependent on the Jews to convert. If the Jews won't convert, he won't come back.
Right. Here, let's see here. Test. All right, Eleanor, I don't know what else I can do. It sounds good coming through here. So sorry, I apologize. So anyway, so James of Aragon, he orders a debate, and he orders that debate to happen in Barcelona. Okay? And this is what's referred to as the Disputation of Barcelona, or at Barcelona. And this is famous. However, it is a more benign of, I mean, I hate to use the word benign because it wasn't benign, but considering that it's happening, let's call it 230 years before the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, then you can imagine that things get worse and worse as time goes on. It's benign only because it's in its early stages. However, it is still, as I mentioned, a reflection of what's going on in Greater Europe already, which is a suspicion of the Talmud and a desire to eradicate the Talmud. So anyway, in this Disputation of Barcelona, there are essentially the debate focuses on three things. The first thing is, has the Messiah come or not? Number two, is the Messiah divine or human? And number three, do the Jews practice the true law, or do Christians practice the true law? So that is the essence of the Disputation of Barcelona in 1263. Now, I am going to read the first, we'll have people doing readings, but I've decided that I want to be the one who reads Rambam, Nachmanides. So, let me just say, his name is Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, also called Nachmanides, not to be confused with Rambam, Maimonides. Two different people, entirely. So just because I call him Ramban and it sounds like Rambam, and just because I call him Nachmanides and it sounds very much like Maimonides, they are two entirely different people. Okay? That's number one. In fact, there is a very, very funny video, which I'll have to find. Again, I don't have it right now. If I was smart, I would have had it and shown it to you. But it was made in Israel, and it's like the equivalent of Starbucks. And Nachmanides, Ramban, is at Starbucks and he orders his latte. It's all in Hebrew, but when I explain it to you, when you find it yourself, you'll be able to understand it fully because I'm going to explain it to you and then you'll realize just how funny it is. Okay, so, so he orders his latte and they ask, like at Starbucks, they say name. right? And he says, Ramban. And they write down Rambam, okay? Because they misheard it. And so his latte comes up and they're like, Rambam? Right? And he's like, yes. And he's like, Rambam! And they're all like celebrating. They're like, Rambam, Rambam, Rambam. And he says, no, I'm Ramban. Like Ramban, and it's just this whole miscommunication about Ramban and Ramban. But what's funny about it is he's trying to communicate, but I'm something, I know that Maimonides was amazing, but I'm something too. I'm Ramban. I'm like one of the biggest commentators the Bible has ever seen, like huge commentator of the Bible. I was the main defendant at the destination of Barcelona. Like Ramban is up there in our top 50, but he's not Rambam, but he's really high up there. And he's getting mad because they're like thinking, oh, whatever, Rambam. We thought you were Rambam. And it's a really funny video. It's all in Hebrew, but now that I've explained it to you, you could watch it because it's really just a bunch of words, Rambam, and him trying to defend himself. But suffice it to say, God, what I'll do is I wish I could find it, but I'm not going to take time to do it. But I think, by the way, okay, last thing, I believe it's from a group called The Jews Are Coming. So if you look up online, The Jews Are Coming, I think that's a comedy troupe. I think you may be able to find it there. Okay, now, so here's Ramban reflecting on, there are, and by the way, we have so many records of the proceedings of these disputations. Now, why? It's because the Pope and the King, they took really, really copious notes about it. That's A. B is because these writers, Ramban is a prolific writer, and he writes about this. And so the first few things that I'm going to read about what Nachmanides says comes from the records of the king. The last one that I'll read is from Nachmanides' own reflections after the fact. Now, why do I say this? Because ultimately, what is really important to know is that these disputations, the second one that we're going to talk about later, called the Disputation of Tortosa, which is far more consequential and significant. But the first one, Disputation of Barcelona, they were both intended to be, they were staged events. It wasn't, you will see that the king is going to talk about how he wants it to be a fair argument and dispute and debate, but it's never intended to be that. It's always intended to be, it's a spectacle. In the case of Tortosa, a real spectacle with people jeering and mobs. Barcelona was more of a controlled, kind of respectful debate, even though the winner is already known. The Christian wins every time. Now, the debate, by the way, is staged between someone named Pablo Cristiani, is the representative of Christianity, and Nachmanides and Ramban. Pablo Cristiani, that's funny. Pablo Cristiani is a former Jew. Both of the litigants, or the people who are defending the Christian side, are conversos. Those who converted to, but therefore they have the knowledge of the Jewish corpus of literature, especially the Talmud. So here are just three different excerpts from Nachmanides, Ramban, about the Disputation of Barcelona. And in each case, these are going to be his defenses to the three questions, right? So question number one, has the Messiah come or not? Nachmanides says, does he mean to say the sages of the Talmud believed in Jesus as the Messiah and believed that he is both human and divine, as held by the Christians? I mean, does Pablo Christiani mean to say that? However, it is well known that the incident of Jesus took place during the period of the Second Temple. He was born and killed prior to the destruction of the temple, while the sages of the Talmud, like Rabbi Akiva and his associates, followed this destruction. Those who compiled the Mishnah, Rabbi, it should be Nasi, and Rabbi Nathan, lived many years after the destruction. And the more so, Rabbi Ashi, who compiled the Talmud, who lived about 400 years after the destruction. If these sages believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and that his faith and religion were true, and if they wrote these things from which Friar Pablo Christiani, intends to prove this, then how did they remain in the Jewish faith and in their former practice? For they were Jews, remained in the Jewish faith all their lives, and died Jews. And they and their children and their students who heard their teachings, why did they not convert and turn to the faith of Jesus, as Friar Paul did? If these sages believed in Jesus and in his faith, how is it that they did not do as Friar Paul, who understands their teaching better than they themselves do? Now, so what you're hearing, obviously, is some sarcasm, too, and like, oh, Friar Paul is, Pablo Christiani's, he feels like he knows the truth, that the Messiah has come. But these people who lived, who lived 1,100 years ago, who lived at the time or right after Jesus, and you're saying that they believed this, or that they thought this too, based upon the Talmud? Really? And yet they lived and died as Jews, and they were the ones right there, and yet you believe that they knew this also? It's like, this is absurd. That's what Nachmanides was saying about the first question, about whether the Messiah has come or not. And whether the question Messiah is divine or human, Nachmanides writes, it seems most strange that the creator of heaven and earth resorted to the womb of a certain Jewish lady, grew there for 9 months, and was born as an infant, and afterwards grew up and was betrayed into the hands of his enemies, who sentenced him to death and executed him, and that afterwards he came to life and returned to his original place. The mind of a Jew or any other person simply cannot tolerate these assertions. If you have listened all your life to the priests who have filled your brain and the marrow of your bones with this doctrine, and it has settled into you because of that accustomed habit, I would argue that if you were hearing these ideas for the first time now as a grown adult, you would never have accepted them. Right? So is Jesus divine or human? It's like, if you take out, like Nachmanides is saying, if you take out the name Jesus, and you just say, oh, I heard of a person who was, born to a Jewish mother, a person, born to a Jewish mother, was in the womb for 9 months, was born as an infant, grew up as a kid, played, did crazy things as a kid, and then, went on to become the Messiah, and really is the son of, and then put into the hands, persecuted and put into the hands, and then rose, you would say, come on. But only because this is what you've been told all your life, that's why you believe this so strong.
Oh, by the way, the word enemies here means Jews.
Not necessarily. Does it mean Jews to you?
Betrayed into the hands of this enemy. That was the multitude on the marketplace, and the multitude was the Jews.
Okay. Could be the Romans too, but okay. But could be both. Let's accept it. And then, of course, the one about which religion is more true, Nachmanides' claim, nothing has changed in the character of the world or of mankind to make the Torah's commandments superfluous. What is he saying? He is saying that, the constant claim about Christianity and Judaism, which is, about Christians to Judaism, which is, we're not saying that the Torah is wrong. We're just saying that the Torah needs to be updated. And that the Torah is missing a lot, and what that is that it's missing is the New Testament. Well, that's why Christians refer to it as the Old Testament and the New Testament, but Jews don't call it the Old Testament. Jews recognize what people are saying when they refer to the Old Testament, but that doesn't mean that's a Jewish term. In fact, a Jew who calls it the Old Testament is in some, a Jew who calls it the Old Testament is in some way or measure is insulting itself.
It's ignorant.
Well, right, it's acknowledging that there's something new. There's a new truth out there that updates that old one that's out of date. And Nachmanides is saying, no, it's not outdated and superfluous, it's perfect, as is. So, his answer to a question, which religion is more true, is Judaism. Because you think there's something that needs to be added, but there's nothing that needs to be added. Everything that we need is right there. So, that's the record, the Christian record of the proceedings, or not the whole proceedings, but 3 quotes that I wanted to kind of give you about what Nachmanides had to say at Barcelona. However, there also is another writing, which is there we have the writing of what Nachmanides wrote after the disputation at Barcelona, intentionally to a Jewish audience. Excuse me. So the point is that he is now communicating to his Jewish audience what happened back at Barcelona, at those, his take on what happened. And what Nachmanides says there is, Friar Paul claimed, behold, the passage in Isaiah chapter 53 tells of the death of the Messiah and how he wants to fall into the hands of his enemies and how he was placed alongside the wicked, as happened to Jesus. Do you believe that this section speaks of the Messiah? I said to him, in terms of the true meaning of the section, it speaks only of the people of Israel, which the prophets regularly call Israel my servant or Jacob my servant. In other words, what Nachmanides is trying to communicate is they tried to conveniently explain that the Torah is there are passages in the Torah referring to Jesus. And I was like, and I quickly said back, no, it's not. It's all about Israel, it's not about Jesus. Again, it was never, from the perspective of Ramban, Nachmanides, he would say, of course he was the finer litigant in this disputation. If you ask the court records of James of Aragon, he would say it was never, of course not, because there was no way you could be a winner. Now, interestingly, in the end, James of Aragon, the king, was captivated by Ramban and by what he had to say, and he offered him money, 300 gold coins, and said that he had never heard, and here's this line. James of Aragon said, I wrote it down. He had never heard an unjust cause so nobly defended. Right? It's like, you did a beautiful job of defending pedophilia. Right? Boy, if there was ever a reason for pedophilia, you did a great job. Like, by the way, obviously that's a joke. I came up with an analogy. Do not believe in it. So, but it's so clearly what it's kind of also communicating is that Nachmanides did do a fine job of defending Judaism. So he didn't feel one less thought. He never felt, though, he felt like, even though it was never intended for him to win, but he didn't feel the press of the danger of being there. He knew that it was a conversation that was never intended for him to win, but at least a conversation and a debate. And so he was able to be a defender of our people and say the things that he wanted to say. Now, go ahead.
So this all obviously predated the Inquisition.
Yeah, by 250 years.
Who chose Nachmanides to defend the Judaism? I mean, you said it was a setup, so I was wondering if...
Oh, no. It was a setup that he couldn't win because they wouldn't have let him. But I'm sure the Jewish community kind of put their greatest scholars.
So he wasn't chosen by the king?
Right, at least not that I know of. It's a good question. It's possible, because it's possible just that he had name recognition and the king said, bring in that person who I've heard of before. So anti-Semitism is rising rapidly at this point, though. So, again, the anti-Semitism of Europe has now come into Spain. Christianity, the Christian, if James of Aragon has now come into Aragon, and that is the northern part of Spain. And slowly but surely, they are also pushing their way south.
But what was the catalyst for the anti-Semitism? Usually there's some kind of strife, societal strife or economic respect.
Yeah, I mean, so there's the Black Death hasn't happened quite yet, but there is poverty, there is disease, there is and there is jealousy whenever you have foreigners or strangers who are who are occupying positions of power, then that can be a focus of anger. I mean, we're going to get to, it's not quite yet, but soon there's going to be another very strong element or focus for something like this, but it's not quite yet, and it's going to be about the conversos themselves, but let me hold off on giving you that. So there's going to be another reason that I'm going to suggest to you, but I want to hold off on that. So, again, it's rising. Anti-Semitism is rising. But still the Jews of Spain are living in relative security until 1391. 1391, and now due to great economic instability, and the bubonic plague was in 1370, I think. And so definitely the after effects of the bubonic plague, and also, by the way, a series of pogroms. And pogroms are, if you don't know what that term is, riots and anti-Jewish kind of hostilities in town after town. And there are pogroms all across Castile and Aragon, which is the northern Spain. And so things changed. And what was unique about 1391, though, and this is the part that I want to point out, and that is that there's it's a point in which people start converting in mass numbers. Converting, they basically, I guess it was the pogroms that probably did it, and that they realized that it's just not worth it to be Jews. Now, what's not clear is whether they are at this point saying, and I know this is on your mind, whether they are saying it's not worth it to be a Jew, or it's not worth it to be outwardly a Jew. Mm-hmm. And I know that that's on your mind, and that's always going to be a subject for conversation and debate. But what we can say is that regardless of if it's with the intention of just not communicating their Judaism, or if it's the actual intention of just converting out of Judaism, what we do know is that there are mass conversions happening to Christianity starting in the year 1391. Go ahead, Jay.
One of the important things I've learned from your discussion, Rabbi, is that the anti-Jewish prejudice came from the north,
Yes.
from France.
Yes.
And this really follows, and pogroms started afterwards, this really follows the Crusades,
Yes.
which occurred earlier, and in which there were pogroms of all of the Jewish communities of the Rhineland and France.
The Crusades obviously were heading to Palestine.
Yes.
But you're right, that the Crusades, just because it was heading to Palestine didn't mean that it didn't also then branch off into various different other places. Absolutely. The Crusades are, in great measure, the influence so much of this, yes.
By the way, the word pogrom in Russian means thunder.
Wow.
And it refers to the beating of the hoofs of the Cossacks.
Yeah. So, all right, so let's read a little bit from Sacher, from A History of the Jews. Anybody want to have the camera shoot over to them and read a little bit? It's just fun to have the camera shoot over to you.
Yes.
Oh, great. The camera's not even going to have to move if you read, though. Go ahead. Towards the close of the 13th century.
Towards the close of the 13th century, several of the Christian provinces of Spain began to turn from their policy of tolerance. Navarre fell to France in 1285, and its Jews were soon subjected to the restrictions and degradations endured by their co-religionists on the other side of the Pyrenees. The Pyrenees separate France and Spain.
Yes.
The French example was sufficiently impressed upon Navarre by 1328, and there were massacres in Estella, Tudela, and other large centers in which more than 6,000 Jews lost their lives. Clerical agitators helped to bring Aragon into line with Navarre, and soon the statute books reflected the general animosity of the masses.
Keep going.
Only Castile remained fairly faithful to its tradition of tolerance. When the Black Death itself evoked no outrages, the Jews congratulated themselves there was at least one spot in Europe where freedom was not crushed out by bigotry. Then Castile turned too, and Christian Spain could boast of a uniform Jewish policy.
Okay, so that's it, thank you.
I might add that the reason Jews were not as deeply affected by the plague is because they had Jewish tradition of cleanliness. And so they washed their hands more often than what the Christians did not do.
Yeah. So, and I should point out to you, and it's important to say this, that while the Jews most certainly suffered, great, we were not the only ones. That Muslims suffered too. That the Muslims were also in the same, they were called Moriscos, and in the same, Moranos means, I think, swine. Moriscos is less of a pejorative term, but it also is a reflection of those. It's the equivalent of Morano for Muslims. I mean, I'm just trying to point out that this was not a uniquely Jewish thing, and A, it's no surprise, but B, it's also kind of an interesting kind of parallel for the Jewish world and the Muslim world, which, as I've said over and over again, we're very similar. Islam and Judaism are very similar religions on so many different levels, and so it's no shock that we've always gotten along, except when it comes to Israel. We've always gotten along, and it's no shock that we flourished in Muslim Spain, because it was easy for the Muslims to appreciate what the Jews were all about: study, prayer, one God, eating foods at certain times, lunar calendars, like all this stuff. We were like, all right, so they got us. And so it's no surprise that we're kind of in the same boat with the Muslims at this time.
Two comments. Number one, I don't know about the hand washing being more common among Jews than among Christians, but there is a Jewish activity that has also been cited as a reason the Black Plague didn't hit, and that was Passover, cleaning out all the hummus, and thereby reducing the chance of rodents living in your storage areas.
Was the bubonic plague transmitted by rodents?
Yeah.
Right?
Rats?
Yeah. Number two.
Rodents. Was that,
Mice, yeah.
wasn't an airborne
No.
thing? It was
No, it was the fleas on the rats.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's apocryphal, but number two, what hasn't been mentioned yet is, don't you think that the anti-Jewish sentiment of the Christians fundamentally was a matter of theocide, that this is a fundamental aspect of the Christian religion.
right, and the passion and
If Christ wasn't killed, there'd be no Christianity.
right. So Christ has to be killed.
And there has to be a villain.
Right, it has to be a villain, and right, and it's a whole lot easier to have a villain who is still around than a villain who is no longer around.
And there's a thing about Islam versus Christianity and the Jew versus the Jews, is that the relationship between Islam and the Jews was just one of outsiders versus us versus them. Whereas in Christianity, it was fundamentally the good guys versus the bad guys.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. And also, with respect, again, to Islam, it was us versus them, and, as I was saying before, and a them that makes sense to us.
Right.
You're not like, you're not an other in the way that you're like from Mars. You're an other in terms of you don't believe in Allah and Muhammad, and therefore you're not us, our people.
We also didn't kill Allah.
We also didn't kill Allah or Muhammad for that matter.
That's right.
Right. No. And I was telling Carol that Islam, I mean, it's in the Quran. It talks about how I've created many nations so you can know one another, and Islam in the Quran also it kind of mocks Christianity. It's because of the Trinity, saying there's one God, three gods, one God. What is this? And it approves of Judaism's recognition of one God. Period. And my point being is that so for Islam, Judaism and Islam really we're just kind of step brothers and sisters. Whereas Christianity kind of takes that notion of oneness of God and it kind of really challenges it. And so that's hard for Islam to handle too.
However, the position of Islam is that it is the third and last divine revelation, the first being Abraham, the second being Jesus. And because it is the final revelation, everybody has to convert to Islam or they are infidels.
I'm not so sure. I don't think that you're an infidel if you're not Muslim. I think you are an infidel if you are a blasphemer. I think that jihad is not, I don't think jihad is the warlike kind of thing that we think of jihad now. I think jihad maybe is come, live, experience our culture, and you will see about the beauties of Islam. But, but Carol, go ahead. I know that you kind of did a little differently too, more like, you learned it as the sixth commandment of Islam. I'm not sure I've ever heard of it that way, because why, if it's the sixth commandment, why is it that I can sit down with the imam, why is it I'm invited to an iftar, a couple days ago, on Monday rather, because it's like, I don't think that it's a commandment of Islam.
But at the same time, Islam was political.
Yeah. Yes.
And they were very concerned as they marched across to conquer all those people. One way to do it was by making people accept Islam.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
And what Paul said is also very important, that they viewed themselves as the last prophet, so to speak. Muhammad was the last prophet, and the other ones were subsumed.
Yeah, yeah, except I think that Abraham wasn't a prophet. Moses, you talk about it being the prophet, not Abraham, by the way, Paul. But yes. All right. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to have this, because I feel like I'm not able to skillfully kind of, talk about this. And as I mentioned last time, I want to stay in my lane. It's like I don't want to start talking about stuff that I don't really know what I'm talking about. And so allow me just to kind of go back into this. Let's take a look at the next contribution here. This one also by Stocker, starting with the wholesale conversions. Would anyone like to be Valerie? Go ahead. The wholesale conversion goes on to the next one. Yeah, go ahead.
The wholesale conversions, which began in 1391, changed the course of Spanish and Jewish history. Until then, converts had been welcomed with open arms and had been denied no opportunity to advance as far as their talents could carry them. There was genuine rejoicing when a new soul found the true Catholic way and was saved from the horrors of eternal perdition. This relationship continued so long as converts were few and humble. But after 1391, when the pressure upon the Jews became fierce, whole communities went into the Christian faith. The majority of the converts eagerly took advantage of their new position. They flocked in their hundreds and thousands to the places from which they had formerly been excluded by their faith. They entered forbidden professions and the quiet cloisters of the universities. They won important state positions and penetrated even into the sanctum sanctorum of the church. Their power increased with their wealth, and many became eligible for admission into the oldest and most aristocratic families in Spain. Intermarriages were frequent, and within half a century, virtually every noble house had infiltrations of Jewish blood.
Okay, so this is, this is fascinating, because what it's saying is that, the Christians so desperately wanted, the conversion of Jews, right? And yes, it's true. And you've heard about that, and you've heard about how, for a moment, let's fast forward to the expulsion. And what was the options? Convert, death, or leave. And yes, true. However, there was also a problem with that. And that is, Jews are smart, Jews are talented, and not saying exclusively smart and talented, I'm just saying they are smart and talented, and so they knew, convert, okay, we'll convert, and we'll just kind of, and by the way, and Ben-Zion Netanyahu, father of Bibi Netanyahu, wrote about this and said that these conversions were legit, that they wanted, that they were just like, it's kind of like it's Leopoldstadt, which I talked about, and I know you saw. It's a Broadway show, a Broadway play right now in New York, and it's about, it's about this Viennese family, and and it's like they're just kind of moderately, some of them are just, they're assimilated Jews. They got a Christmas tree in their house, and some of them in this family converted altogether because it's better for business. They didn't care. And in droves and droves of people, masses and masses of people's mass conversions. But what does this mean? Though suddenly, now, and remember, Christians wanted this. Until it happened, it's like it was a quote, embarrassment of Christian riches. Because now what was happening was that these Jews were in business and in university, and suddenly it's like, now it's like, the Christians who were born Christians were like, wait, was I not admitted to the university because they let that convert? Just because he converted to Judaism? And now it's like what's happening is there is a great deal of an enlargement, resentment by the old Christian guard to this new group of Christians who are converts. Again, remember, that's what they wanted, and now they got it, and they don't like it because now they've taken our jobs. It's kind of like the immigration. Give me you're tired, you're humble, you're tired, except just don't take my job, right? And it's what's happening there. And so now what you have, by the way, in these various different communities are three distinct communities. You have Jews, you have Christians, and then you have conversos, Jews who have converted to Christianity but are still living in their own kind of community outside of the Jewish community, but not fully integrated into the Christian community.
And do they have a Passover?
No.
They don't celebrate Passover.
Well, Easter. Yeah, they're Christians, or at least so we know.
Yeah, well, Passover is celebrated in some Unitarian churches.
Unitarian is different. Passover is also celebrated in some Catholic churches, but they're doing it kind of as a let's see what that's right.
That's the Last Supper.
Yeah. So this all happened after 1391, and then what happened was, the Disputation of Barcelona gets more attention because it's Ramban, Nachmanides, and it's the city of Barcelona, but more consequential in terms of like the Jewish experience was the next disputation that happened, which was the one at Tortosa. Now Tortosa, by the way, just in case you're wondering, since I brought my map, might as well show you. So here is one side of Spain, and there's Barcelona right here, and Tortosa right south of Barcelona by that much. So just take this much, and that's what. How far? Let's see. Do I have a scale here? All right, that much. All right. It appears to be 200 miles, or 150 miles south of Barcelona, Tortosa. Now, the primary sources we have for the disputation of Tortosa, that's really kind of extraordinary, we have a bunch of them. We have one that was written by kind of a famous Jewish personality named Joseph Albo. He wrote a text called Sefer HaIkarim, and the whole introduction to Sefer HaIkarim, it's a book of principles, is what that means. And the whole introduction has to do with the disputation at Tortosa. And he was there. Also, but probably the greatest source for the disputation at Tortosa was written by a person named Solomon ibn Verga. If you want to write, you can, it doesn't matter, the names. Solomon ibn Verga, who wrote a book called Shevet Yehudah. And he wrote this, though, in 1510. So that is 100 years after, because the disputation of Tortosa went from 1412 and 1413. And Ibn Verga wrote this in 1510. So we're talking 100 years later. However, he wrote it based upon the documents and letters that he had from someone named Astru Kalevi, who was there at Tortosa. And during one of the breaks, because again, the disputation of Tortosa went for 18 months, during one of the breaks of the disputation, Halevi was writing correspondence, and Solomon ibn Verga got the correspondence and so though he wrote this book, Shevet Yehuda, 100 years later, or 95 years later, still it was based upon primary sources. Okay, so first, the first is I want to, okay, so first of all, unlike Barcelona, this one was a staged spectacle with mobs and masses, and screaming and yelling. I don't know, is anyone ever, you ever see, I don't know if anyone ever watched, is anyone a Star Trek Next Generation? Does anyone know this? So in literally the first episode of Star Trek Next Generation, that Captain Picard, who was from the Starship, everybody's put on trial. And all these mobs are all yelling at him and screaming at him. So clearly only Valerie knows what I'm talking about. And so therefore it's irrelevant. But it's like they're yelling and screaming.
It's a really good analogy.
But now you can picture what I'm talking about, right?
But what about January 6th? That was good. It's also a good example.
Yes and no. Yeah, in terms of mob, yes, but it was still like a bullfight. Like a bull, but you can imagine. So imagine this. By the way, this image here is a picture, a depiction of the. Obviously, they don't. This is actual, but you know, inside you had all these people yelling and screaming and the. Well, I won't fully say. Why don't we just read a little bit about it? So. A reader, this by the way, Yitzhak Ber, who wrote a book called History of the Jews and Christian Spain, he is the primary, I mean, in terms of, he's not a primary source, but he is the authoritative person on this period in Spain. So a reader, please, who? Yes, Richard. They're a doomed delegation.
They're a doomed delegation of 44 rabbis. Among them, the preeminent leaders of the Jewish communities in the early 15th century Aragon had been summoned by written command of Pope Benedict XIII to the Alhama of Girona, and from there to all major Jewish communities of Aragon to engage in a disputation on the Messiah, to commence on February 14th, 1413, and would last for 21 months.
Yeah, 21 months, not 18 months. So we have an order was given by the Pope, not by the King James, but by the Pope, that, you know, that 44 rabbis and also, you know, preeminent members of the Jewish community, of which there were many, had to show up. Why? Well, sure, to convince them to convert, but it's not just that. It's more. It's just to break their spirits. And in 1412, the Disputation of Tortosa, the plan is to break the spirit of the Jew. And how do you do it? You bring the Jewish leaders in, and you turn a debate, which is not a debate, into like literally, they are the bull in the bullfight. Mm-hmm. That's what it's more like. They are the bull of the bullfight. And everyone is cheering and yelling, you know, and screaming, and it's, you know, inside this hall, you know, are maybe a number of people, but right outside the walls of this hall are thousands of screaming people, you know, waited on bated breath for every great word that they could say in which they broke the spirit of the Jew or of the rabbi. And now, some claim, by the way, that these were not the scholars of scholars. Netanyahu, by the way, Bibi Netanyahu's father, claims that these were kind of like second-rate Jewish scholars. It's not true. I mean, Joseph Alba was hardly a second-rate scholar, that's for sure. But he claims that they were not the best. They were not of Ramban's equality. That said, also added to this is it was never meant for them to be able to put forth any arguments because, you know, it's like, imagine, you know, the person who has a knife in his back and say, oh, what do you say now? And, you know, it's kind of, you know, they were speaking from fear regularly. They knew that this was never intended for them. They couldn't, there'll be something that I'll read to you in a second about it, but yeah, I'll hold on. So this is from the first-hand report of Joseph Alba. Well, Alba was there, but he writes about it in the Sefer HaIkarim afterwards. A reader, we order and exhort. Anybody? Go ahead, Jim.
We order and exhort that you send 4, or at least 2, of your most learned men who shall appear before us at the time indicated to hear what we shall say, and reply to the above-mentioned articles. You must not forget that if you will not obey our injunctions, we will proceed against you by means of the proper remedies as prescribed by the laws human as well as divine.
Right, which is, that's a way of saying, come or you're going to, you know, or we're going to consider it blasphemy and you're going to be killed. It's no longer this is the best defense of an unjust cause I've ever heard. This is now we insist that you come because we're also going to embarrass you here. And so therefore we want your best people here so we can embarrass them. And we will embarrass them. Because if you were to put forth a legitimate argument, we will stop that, turn it, and start over again in the direction that we want to go. Or we will make you respond to a very small thing, and you can respond, you can say, yeah, but we're not going to let the buts. All we want to hear is your response to this little small thing. You get my point. Okay, so,
I'll tell you, this whole time period feels like it's got all the many of the earmarks of the Holocaust, starting with Mein Kampf, leading up to Kristallnacht.
yeah.
It's to me, it's pretty striking.
I would argue that it was even more gruesome.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the scale of death is not comparable.
But it was about exterminating of people.
Yes.
Extinguishing of people from.
But in this case, it was like, I mean, they would take Jews and strip them and put them in cages and leave them in the middle of the town square in a cage. Like, it was gruesome what they did. Or I went to this, it was horrifying, but I had to go, even though it was horrifying. They have a museum of torture in Sevilla, and it is nauseating, but I could not go. And they showed all of the different methods of torture that were used, not just at that time, but all of them were used at that time, but then there were others. And I mean, and talking about putting people in the belly of a metal cow, and then burning, and then putting a fire under it, and just burning people, cooking people in an oven, or a lot. And trust me, there's some which are even more nauseating. I mean, that one was like, but the point is that so they were not just about killing and eradicating, but humiliating and torture.
But why is the Jewish people, or also including Israel, why don't we talk more about this? I mean, we're very happy to talk about the Holocaust, like day and night.
I think it's because it's so much older.
A lot of, until this moment, frankly, for me, this bears some scrutiny, I think.
Yeah, I will say this much. In 1992, I mentioned this last week, and I know this because my father, who is really, he knows his stuff, really, this is his love. He went around in 1992 on the 500th anniversary of the expulsion and lectured in various different places around the country. I can't remember if it was around the world, but definitely around the country. And, and so in 1992, this was definitely a conversation that was had. But I think that as it so oftentimes is when you have, I mean, first of all, the Holocaust is Paul's family, everyone's family around this table. But I mean, Paul literally, he can tell you, and Jim literally can point to the death of people that they knew. You know, I can point to the death of my greater family, even though I didn't, you know, like, but the Holocaust is still raw, right? And whereas this is, you know, is 530 years old, and so it's not raw, in the same way that also the destruction of the temple, which also was a Jewish eradicating experience, is no longer raw for us either. I think that it's possible, though, in 200 years, we might look back on this and classify, you've got the Spain and you've got the Holocaust, because it'll be 200 years from now. But for the time being, I don't think anyone talks about anything, but it's a good question. And the other thing is, and in terms of I mean, in the case of Spain, we're talking about the death, and I'm afraid to throw numbers around because now I'm really off, but I'm gonna throw numbers around knowing that I'm doing so with hesitation. We're talking about the death of 10,000 people, the conversion of 100, you know, of the 100,000 people, and the departure of many also, and the Holocaust, we're talking about 6 million deaths. I mean, in terms of just numbers, one is just off the charts staggering, the other one is nauseating and disappointing, but certainly doesn't change compared to, but then again, in terms of the percentage, I mean, obviously we didn't have the same number of people, and I get all that too. I'm just kind of aware that the very number 6 million just is such a staggering number for us that it's hard for us to get our minds off of it. But I understand what you're saying, Ralph, for sure. But let Richard comment.
Well, the other thing in terms of comparison is that, first of all, between the Spanish situation and Germany, technology improved,
Right.
quotation marks, so that if you're going to kill a population,
Easier to kill loads of numbers.
easier to kill more in the 20th century than back. But the other thing is, I don't think we ought to spend a lot of time on the techniques, like, for instance, the cow business and stuff like that, boiling people alive, because that was not particularly anti-Jewish. Those would that was part of their
way,
their punishment at the time.
Yeah.
And so they just used that on Jews.
Correct. But what I was talking about was it was intended to showcase, to scare the shit, excuse me, out of all the people who were kind of looking at it. And, oh my God, look at this person in the cage.
But that's what you did with criminals.
Correct. That deterred people, and that kind of kept people quiet and converting, or whatever it was. It had a bigger purpose, obviously. It was not just to the person in the cage or in the cow, but to the people who were looking at it, probably more important than the people who were in there. Yes?
What I will always remember is, in Vienna, I was 11 years old, playing soccer with my friends in the park, when Hitler drove down in a parade in one of the main streets, and the people were screaming so loud and so long. I will always remember that. I wanted to go see, but I was afraid.
Yeah, for sure. So, did you have a thought? Go ahead.
Yes, on this issue, the Spanish Catholic position with regard to the Inquisition is that it was directed against conversos who...
We're not there yet, I agree. Let me hold off on 1 second, because we're not on the Inquisition yet. Yes. I'm just trying to go one step at a time here. So, you have, at Tortosa, you have the main defendant or litigator or the Christian representative is a gentleman named Joshua Halorki. That's his Jewish name. He converted, and he is now Geronimo de Santa Fe. And he is he was a converso who rose in the inner sanctum sanctorum, but he was a great scholar of Jewish texts. And so he became a great litigant against Judaism because he knew the texts, right? Now, and both sides knew that this was not going to be a polite debate. They even knew that it wasn't going to be a ferocious fight. Instead, it was, as I mentioned, a staged spectacle with a preordained outcome. Submission by the Jews, at least, and or conversion, on the spot. The defendants, you go ahead.
So I guess my question would be, why did they even bother with this if they knew the outcome?
Because again, it was to break the spirits of the Jews and to get everyone, and to lay the groundwork. Because to say why did they bother, it was fun. It was like entertainment. And it was a way of communicating the superiority of Christianity and strengthening the Christians' resolve and breaking the Jewish resolve.
Wasn't the purpose also to eradicate Judaism as a religion?
Yes, but not quite. I mean, laying the groundwork for that, for sure. So the defendants, as we said, 44 rabbis, Jewish nobility as well. The prosecutor, Joshua Halordi. Now, his strategy, as it was laid out, was to establish that that the Talmud actually constituted abundant proof for Christian beliefs, not Jewish, Christian beliefs. The Talmud established abundant proof for Christian beliefs. Geronimo de Santa Fe was calm, self-assured. He was, the rabbis were disorganized.
But there's a passage in Genesis, since Sarah had been barren, it said, God remembered Sarah, and as a result, she gave birth. This is the launching platform for Christianity, because Jesus was born without sin. And this is a sort of a parallel. Sarah conceived only because God wanted her to. So Christians refer to this as an example that led to the birth of Jesus.
Okay, thanks. So again, the air in the room is poisonous, it's malevolent, and Geronimo de Santa Fe literally or indirectly threatened the rabbis with death should they remain unwilling to carefully and respectfully respond to each of his arguments. And so Ibn Verga, quoting Geronimo de Santa Fe, based upon the writings of Astro Kalevi. Again, so you have to understand this whole, but it's, so what I'm simply trying to do is show you the relative legitimacy of these primary texts. It's that, so Ibn Verga says in Shemini, he says, "Come now and let us reason together, but if you refuse and rebel, you will be devoured by the sword." That's Geronimo de Santa Fe, or Joshua Halordi, same person. Joshua Halordi is the Jewish name, Geronimo de Santa Fe is his Christian name. So, sure, let's have a conversation, but if you refuse, I'm going to kill you. So that's hardly, anyway. And then Pope Benedict, his comment, this was found in the Latin protocols. Remember, again, they kept great notes about this. They really did. And I was talking to my dad about this. He was like, he has no reason to think that the notes from the Latin protocols were entirely, they were reliable. They were reliable. This is the Pope saying, "Maestro Geronimo has indicated that he wishes to prove that the Messiah has already come and demonstrated from the words of your own Talmud. We shall see whether the truth is found in his argument or whether he has dreamed a dream. Don't be afraid of him, because in a debate the same rules apply for both sides." That's a lie. I mean, he may have said that. You know what I'm not doubting that he said those words. I'm just doubting that he believed those words. In any event, so Geronimo de Santa Fe uses an ambiguous verse from the Talmud as a basis for his argument. And it comes from Sanhedrin in the Talmud. And the verse or the line from the Talmud says, the school of Eliyahu taught, 6,000 years is the duration of the world, 2,000 chaos, 2,000 Torah, 2,000 the days of the Messiah. All right? That's the Talmud. And so, what is Joshua Lurke, Geronimo de Santa Fe's argument? He's like, yeah, 6,000 years of the world according to you, 2,000 are, those early chaotic years, from the creation of the world to Abraham, and then the second 2,000 years are Abraham to essentially to the destruction of the temple, but it doesn't matter the exact years. And then the next 2,000 years of the day are the Messiah, days of the Messiah. That means that 1413, which is when they're living, is during the days of the Messiah, which means Jesus, according to Al-Lurki. Prove me wrong, he says to these rabbis. Now, we understand the Talmud to be not that they're the days while the Messiah is there, but rather the days in which we are experiencing post-temple destruction, the coming of the Messiah, and the hope for the coming of the Messiah. That's how we interpret it. However, the Talmud actually says, and we've talked about this for those of you who have discussed Talmud with me, that the Talmud oftentimes is very terse with its language, right? You have to do a lot of filling in the blanks for, to understand what it's trying to say. And this is one of them. But quite literally, it's the days of the Messiah. So the rabbis have argued that the Talmud, is referring to the possibility of possible dates of the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah. No earlier. So that what they're saying is the Messiah wouldn't come any earlier than the period of the Mishnah. But again, so Ibn Verga then goes on in the next verse, says, yes, but all the sayings quoted by Al-Lurki, this is about either Astra Kalevi or one of the rabbis there defending, in defense. And he says, and so one of the rabbis says, yes, but all the sayings quoted by Al-Lurki were uttered by men who firmly believed that the Messiah had not yet come and gave their life for that belief. Hence, they should not be brought as witnesses to testify against their own faith. Right? So, what one of the rabbis there it was saying was, Geronimo de Santa Fe was saying, hey, it's like you even said in the Talmud that it's the days of the Messiah. And they're saying, it's impossible. They wouldn't have said that because it was contrary to everything they believed. And then the Pope says, you have not been invited to my court to inform me of what your expounders say, but what you yourselves say. In other words, no, not interested in you defending with those lines. Rather, what do you say about this? Can you deny what it says here? Right? It's never intended to be a fair debate. It's always intended to be, it's never intended to be a dialogue. It's always intended to be a spectacle, yeah.
Was the Pope there at these sessions?
Yeah.
So he had come from Rome?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did not send for you to decide which of the two religions, Judaism or Christianity, is the true, since I am aware that my religion and my faith are the true, and that your Torah, while it once was true, has ceased to be so. Right? He's like, I'm not here, you're not convincing, there's no argument about which one's right or wrong. This is now just I already know the answer to this question, says the Pope. And so at the end of 21 months, again, which included a 6-month recess, which is when Astra Halevi wrote all the stuff which Solomon ibn Verga then put into his book. Many of the rabbis capitulated and converted to Christianity. And I always think it is an incredible image for me. Incredible image to think about this. So these rabbis have now spent 21 months of their lives. They're probably now struggling financially or whatever. They were sent by their communities to represent, and now they have converted, right? So now picture the rabbi with a big, big crucifix hanging around their neck, walking back to their towns, knocking on the doors of people's houses, and saying, pay me for going and defending Judaism at Tortosa, with a big crucifix around their neck. It's such a funny image. If it wasn't so horrifying, it would be hilarious. But can you imagine what that must have been like for these people to knock, 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 and open the door, and they see Rabbi Goldstein with a big crucifix around his neck, and saying, yeah, remember this whole Tortosa thing in which I went to go defend Judaism? Please pay me now. It's like, but you got a cross on it. Yeah, I lost, but I still need to be paid. So why did so many convert, and especially the rabbis? Well, of course, fear, physical and material welfare, that they were being away from their families for almost 2 years. They needed to support them, fear for their lives, fear for the future. They saw what was coming down the line. They recognized, the inevitable. Some were even convinced that that the Messiah had in fact already come, right? So various different reasons. By the middle of the 15th century, almost a third of the Jewish community had converted, creating a converso community alongside a Jewish community. But as we talked about, not all the conversos were good Christians. Some of them were Marranos, practicing Judaism in secret. Yeah?
I'm just curious, I'm wondering how they were able to explain away the sort of conventional thinking of Judaism about at least what many of the rabbis teach about the Messiah, that the Messiah is going to usher in this heaven on earth and a period of peace and even resurrection, if you read some of the rabbis. So how do they dismiss all of it? I mean, on what basis does the Messiah exist? What does he represent to the Christians, I wonder?
Yeah.
And how did they represent him to the then Jews in Spain? You know what I mean? It's like
it's right. It's perplexing. Like how it's like, yeah.
Oh, I thought they did.
Let me continue because we can't really go on too much longer, and we have a lot of material. We have a lot of material for 5 minutes. So again, the Christians, you have all these people who converted, and they're like, you can't take our jobs, you can't enter into our social circumstances, you can't, just because you converted. No, the irony is that even, as I mentioned, that even though they wanted the conversion, now they don't. It's too much, and so therefore, what happens is that there's the emergence of this gentleman named Thomas de Torquemada. Now, this is what Jim was about to say, and that is that contrary to what you think, the Inquisition was not focused against Jews. Right? People are like, oh, the Inquisition of Jews. No, the Inquisition did not affect one Jew, not a single Jew. Well, let me say something. The Inquisition did not affect a single person who maintained that he was Jewish. The Inquisition was about heresy. It was about people who said they were Christians, but weren't really Christians. The Marranos, so to speak. The secret Jews. But also, when you think about it, this was an incredible political tool. Because that meant that even people who were good Christians could be just accused, and then the moment they were accused, they were destroyed. Because the moment Torquemada had them, on his record books and put them on the racks, right? It's like no one's surviving that.
That's what the Germans did in Europe when they were able to identify from Catholic records that somebody's grandmother was Jewish.
And right, and so, yes, thank you. And so, just as he affected what he believed was Jews who were crypto-Jews, so again, with Muslims too. And these people, they're rooted out. They're put before a tribunal, they're punished, and it was a perverse attempt to save people's souls by torturing their bodies. So, Don Isaac Abravanel is a famous Jew who was in the very late stages, remained a Jew in Spain in the very late stages. He was a high-ranking official in Ferdinand and Isabella's government. He was biblical and Talmudic scholar, and he was begged by the king and queen to convert to Christianity, but he didn't. So I'm looking at Netanyahu, Ben-Zion Netanyahu's writing. He wrote, when Ferdinand and Isabella issued the order of expulsion against the Jews of Spain, Abravanel approached them to offer an enormous bribe to cancel the decree. As the discussion was still going on, Tomas de Torquemada, head of the Spanish Inquisition, came in, flung his cross on the floor, and cried out to Ferdinand, "Will you betray our Lord Jesus for 30,000 dinars as Judas did for 30 pieces of silver?" Recognizing that his cause was hopeless, Abravanel escaped to Italy, where he continued to write biblical commentaries and works of philosophy in which he tried to console the demoralized exiled Jews. And so the final, as you can imagine, the final part of this story is the expulsion, and ostensibly that the Edict of Expulsion says that Muslims and Jews, by the way, that the reason why we are getting rid of you is because you are the living lifeline for the conversos. In other words, they still see the living Jews there, and they can associate their Jewish tendencies with them. And so if you remove this lifeline, then, this source of Judaism, then you can get, and by getting rid of the Jews, then you can get rid of Judaism too. They will acculturate and assimilate in a much more rapid way if you don't have a JCC and a synagogue, and a Jewish deli right there for these conversos to kind of, that smells like matzo ball soup, like it reminds me of Judaism, right? It's like, all that's gone, then they'll quickly just start eating pork. Yeah.
It strikes me, harking back to not teaching necessarily, we talk about, when I was growing up, I learned about Spain, and I learned about the Golden Period, and I learned about the Inquisition, and I learned about the expulsion. What I don't think we ever pay much attention to are the little things that happened in the meantime that led up to the big things.
Right.
So we don't always see them
Right.
the same way that we should.
But you can also imagine, it's not hard to, in your mind to think about just every little touch of anti-Semitism and every little pogrom that just kind of contributed piece by piece to this growing fire which became out of control.
But if we don't see the pieces, then our ability to equate them to what happens today or in the future is diminished.
That's true. That's true. It's like, if you don't appreciate the fact that Hitler started by delegitimizing the media and by creating registrations and by X and Y, all those things that happened before the killing, then you don't, you think it's like Holocaust just happened one day. No, it's, yeah, I agree. I very much agree. So, really quickly, I took excerpts from this Edict of Expulsion, whereas having been informed that in these kingdoms there were some bad Christians who Judaized and apostatized from our holy Catholic faith, the chief cause of which was the communication of Jews with Christians. We ordered the said Jews in all the cities, towns, and places in our kingdoms and dominions to separate into Jewries and place apart, where they should live and reside, hoping by their separation alone to remedy the evil. Furthermore, we have sought and given orders that inquisition should be made in our said kingdoms, which, as is known for upwards of 12 years, has been and is done, whereby many guilty persons have been discovered, as is notorious. Oh, by the way, the Inquisition continued until only like 150 years ago. They officially ended the Inquisition like in 1880 or something like that. But so the first paragraph is a description from Isabella and Ferdinand about what had happened. But as we are informed that neither that nor the execution of some of the said Jews who have been guilty of the said crimes and offenses against our holy Catholic faith have been sufficient for a complete remedy to obviate and arrest so great an offense to the Catholic faith and religion, therefore we resolve to order all the said Jews and Jewesses to quit our kingdom and never to return or come back to them, or any of them. Therefore we command that by the end of the month of July next, of the present year 1492, they depart from all our said kingdoms and dominions. And they shall not presume to return to nor reside therein or any part of them, either as residents, travelers, or any other manner. If they are found to reside in our kingdoms and dominions, or should in any manner live therein, then incur the penalty of death and confiscation of all their property to our treasury. Yeah, that was the excerpts from the Edict of Expulsion. So the Jews, in the course of 4 months, were forced to liquidate their homes and businesses at obviously absurdly low prices. So what happens, where'd they go? The most fortunate of them, of the expelled Jews, succeeded in escaping to Turkey. Turkey welcomed them. Sultan Bajazet welcomed them warmly, saying, "How can you call Ferdinand of Aragon a wise king? The same Ferdinand who impoverished his own land and enriched ours." Among the most unfortunate refugees were the ones who fled to Portugal, because in Portugal, that was like you bought yourself 3 years. King Emmanuel of Portugal concluded an agreement to marry Isabella, the daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand, and as a condition of the marriage, the Spanish royal family said, "You got to kick everybody out too." And then, so it's and Jews obviously, and oh, by the way, but Jews, they went to Europe too. Spinoza, for example, famous one, he didn't live in Spain, but his great-grandparents or great-great-grand, like a couple generations earlier, had left Spain and went to Amsterdam. So the Spanish Jews did find themselves going to various different places, Turkey being the most successful of them. But Northern Africa too. And that is, oh, by the way, one last thought, you know about Sephardic and Ashkenazic. I mean, this is the Sephardic community at its core, and the continuation of the Sephardic community. And the language that's spoken in the Sephardic community is called Ladino. Ladino is a Spanish-Hebrew combo. And why? Obviously, because
I had a cousin on the West Coast that I visited regularly, and because of her knowledge of Ladino, she could speak with the Spanish-speaking.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty much Spanish.
Isn't your wife also?
She understands, yes.
And anyone who hasn't read Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean,
It's a fun one.
is interesting, and it talks
He came
about,
and spoke here.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
He came.
Well, I read it last year, having no clue how
He came and
all
spoke
the
here.
story went, but
Kunstler, I think.
they got kicked out of here, got kicked out of here, got kicked out of here.
Yeah. Jim.
I wanted to add one additional parallel to the Spanish case and the German case. From 1933 till 1938, the Nazis also wanted the Jews to get out, to take their properties at low cost and to get them out. But other countries during the Depression were not willing to accept Jewish immigrants.
Right.
So that's
Including the United States.
yes.
Right, but I don't think that was, the parallel, yes, but I don't think that was the case in Spain. I think people could leave if they wanted to. I just think that it was just harder. Like leaving and moving, is a big deal. Now, with technology, we have it's a little easier, boats and, shipping lines and planes, obviously now, but then it was, you left and moved to Turkey. That was even moving to North Africa, just across the Strait of Gibraltar was a big deal. Even moving from Toledo to Granada was a huge deal. And so, yeah. So, anyway, this has been, I appreciate it. And, Dad, I look forward to you telling me all of my mistakes. And, and again, the Jews are coming. Look for that video about Ramban. It's worth it. And thank you all for being a part of this, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so earlier, sometimes it takes me a while to think about things.